Hi, welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. We've got great questions for this month's Q&A, including NVIDIA RTX 4000 being pushed back into 2023. Does that mean everyone should run out and get an RTX 3000 GPU? What the heck is going on with pricing in the GPU market, especially with crazy news coming out of Ethereum moving to proof of stake? Does that mean there's a tidal wave of used GPUs coming in? And if so, what is it going to do to prices? Of course, we'll take a look at other PC building aspects as well. If you get value out of this video, give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. With that, let's jump into it. Before that, this video is sponsored by VIP SCD Key. Say goodbye to crazy expensive Windows 10 licenses and that terrible Activate Windows 10 watermark. Right now, use the links in the video description, head over to VIP SCD Key, and get a Windows 10 Home or Pro OEM license for a great price. Pick your product license, then use the PC Builder discount code PC25 for an additional 25% off. Go to the activation settings on your PC, put in the code, and boom, you have a fully licensed Windows 10 for a crazy low price, which can be upgraded for free to Windows 11. Use the links in the video description below. Let's start out where else? Of course, the GPU market. Coded, Spitfire, Retired Killer, Lucimo, all kinds of questions about should we be buying GPUs right now or should we be waiting until RTX 4000 series, especially with the RTX 4000 rumored delays into 2023. So let's just take this one step at a time. As far as we know right now with the leaks, and I put leaks in quotation marks, it looks like NVIDIA is saying through leaks that it's going to delay all except the RTX 4090, which is supposedly a $2,500 graphics card, into 2023. Now, do I believe that? Yeah, no, not really. I have a hard time believing Jensen's gonna allow AMD to launch with RDNA 3 at the, sometime in October or November. That's the rumored launch date for those, and not going to have any kind of counter. I think what they're doing right now is they're simply trying to say, hey, don't worry about RTX 4000 yet. Buy the RTX 3000 series cards that we can't get rid of right now. I think the smarter play on their behalf would be simply to use price reductions if they want to move inventory. That's the old-fashioned way. If you want to sell something that's not selling, you reduce the price. And I think there's a couple of developments that are coming down the pike that are going to force them to reduce prices no matter what they actually want to do. The first one is, and this is exciting, we have Ethereum moving towards proof of stake on September 19th. It actually has a date. Now that date is not set in stone, of course, but at this point they've got one more testnet to go, and then it's time to merge the mainnet on Ethereum. That will end GPU mining as we know it, as effectively a drain on the GPUs out there from gamers completely. And we're going to see a massive flood of used GPUs come in because miners will no longer be able to even turn their rigs on and be able to mine anything profitably after that date. The mining infrastructure out there is so overbuilt. We're talking 20, 30 million GPUs, maybe even more worth of mining GPUs flooding into the used market. Prices are going to crater like we have never seen before. And that is also going to affect prices on the new market as well. Obviously, if you can go out and you can get an RTX 3080 for $180, why would you buy an RTX 3080 for $600 instead? So they're going to have to lower those prices significantly. Kitty. So should you be buying an RTX 3000 series card? Now, yes, if you want one, go ahead. I do still expect RTX 4080 probably by the end of the year at least. Maybe they will push the 4070 into January, but we will see next-gen NVIDIA GPUs. They're not going to let AMD have the stage unchallenged for 2, 3, or 4 months. So just don't worry about that. Even if they launch them in January, that I would still consider waiting. I certainly wouldn't be running out to buy a $1,200 RTX 3090, a brand new one, or even an RTX 3080 Ti for, I think they're going for like $900 and something. That being said, if you are one of the people out there who you're just fed up on waiting and you've decided you're going to spend $1,200 and that's what you're going to go get, I'm not going to judge you for that. We've all been waiting for like a zillion years. So I certainly understand folks who are like, screw it, I'm not waiting anymore. I'm just buying something right now and I'm getting off this stupid merry-go-round that I've been on for 2 years, and I'm going to finally just start enjoying things instead of always having this FOMO that something's going to launch or that I could have saved $5 more here. At some point, especially with the pace of technology going right now, you just got to make a decision when you're going to get in, and that's when you get in. And you got to know that something else is going to be announced or come out, 2 to 5 to 6 months later that's going to make the thing that you had that was super shiny kind kind of obsolete because those days of 2012 when you could build a PC and have it be relevant and cutting edge for 4 or 5 years, they're just gone. And we've got to come to terms with that at some point. All right, but what if you're somebody who's waiting to buy or been thinking about buying an RTX 3060 Ti, an RX 6700 XT, or below that? Yeah, this is where things get hard the closer we get to these supposed announcements and the roadmap and all that. And AMD and NVIDIA still might not tell us when the replacements for those cards are going to come out, even when they launch like their 4090 and 4080, so on and so forth. So I just think right now, if you want to buy a GPU at that level, prices are pretty good. $429 for the 6700 XT. We're looking at about $470 for the 3060 Ti. That's not horrible. I think AMD dominates at the lower end of the lineup. I would definitely avoid cards like the 3050. It's just not worth the $329 ridiculous price tag on it. If you're in the $200-ish range, that 6600, RX 6600 seems pretty enticing. I'd find an extra $60 and grab that. Like, yes, will those cards come down? Of course, I think they're going to continue to come down when there's a huge flood of used mining GPUs in the fall. They're going to continue to come down on news of announcements from AMD and NVIDIA about new GPUs. But you have to, at this point, weigh, am I going to save $20 and waste 3 months of my life waiting for it? Otherwise, I just pull the trigger right now on a lot of those GPUs, especially given the fact that people have been waiting forever. We've got Freddie. Freddie asks, what's the difference between a cheap RTX 3060 Ti model and an expensive one? Oh, does it matter? Or should you buy the more expensive one or not? And this goes for pretty much every GPU, right? Well, we do go over this in quite a bit of detail, including some very specific examples where we go through different specs of different cards that are the same model, but one's more expensive than the other in our Best GPU for Gaming 2022 video. So check that out down in the video description. And if you're somebody who tends to buy the more expensive models, let me know down in the video description, what is it about those models that really attracts you to spend a little bit of extra money on those as opposed to getting the cheaper ones? Now, overall, just to sum this up in a nutshell, and then of course check out the video for a lot more detail, there are a number of things. There's cooling differences, there's cooler differences, there's the number of fans, for instance. Some of them come with a factory applied overclock, although sometimes those overclocks are like 25 megahertz. They're like really, really silly overclocks. They're not real overclocks. And the other thing they often, you'll see differences is the TDP, the actual wattage of the card itself. So the higher end models will often be higher wattage cards. So they're just applying more power so they can clock those things up higher. So those are some of the main differences. When you get to the super high end, of course, you get like more exotic stuff like liquid cooling and others, and really kind of intense factory overclocking. I find that at the high end, if your budget's unlimited, go ahead and, you might as well buy the fastest version of the fastest card out there. That's as fast as you're going to go. But if you're more kind of a price to performance conscious shopper, you definitely want to make sure that you don't overspend on that model to the point where you could have jumped up to another tier. So rather than buying like a 3070 that's got all the bells and whistles, that's more expensive than a 3080, get the cheap 3080. That's been my philosophy, and I think typically that works out much better in terms of price to performance. JV asks, if Intel Arc GPUs ever come to the market, where are those things, right? Since the benchmarks are here, yes, they've done a lot of media with other outlets. They've done all these interviews, and they've let people look at the cards, but they won't sell it to them yet, right? Would I recommend PC builders stick with AMD and NVIDIA or try out those Intel GPUs? Well, I'll tell you, those Intel GPUs have a lot of problems. And my personal opinion on this is that Intel took absolutely the wrong approach. They decided they needed to compete from the high end all the way down, that they needed to have their own upscaling technology, that they needed to have their own version of, the best ray tracing and everything. And they wanted it for creators. They wanted everything all at once right now, and they wanted it to launch. And then they didn't, of course, consider the drivers were going to be such a huge issue because AMD and NVIDIA have been writing drivers for, software that goes back a decade or more. And Intel now has to do the same thing. They've got to make up 10 years worth of drivers in a short amount of time. They would have been much better off just going at the low end. This is like, take the AMD strategy. For many years, AMD could not compete with NVIDIA at the high end, so they didn't. And they just came up with better ways to compete with them at the low end. Intel should have probably done the same thing and then added some of these technologies over time. I just think these things are a disaster, and unless they've fixed those issues in the next 6 months, I'm not going to recommend that people even take a look at them. They are going to be kind of an oddity for people to buy, to kind of mess around with, but they're not a serious gaming GPU. I do think they'll fix it over time, but it's going to take a while, and I just can't recommend unfinished products to people. Dial Taco asked, do I think AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel should prioritize power efficiency with their new chip designs, or should they just crank that power up to get the most performance? Well, listen, I think we're already seeing shades of this with the RTX 40 series, and I was asking kind of gamers over the last couple of years, like, at what point does power become an issue? Well, it turns out probably when Intel's cranking up their stuff to the max. So if you got like an i9 12900K and you want to get like an RTX 4090, you might end up blowing out the fuses in your house. So that there are some physical constraints to what you can do, and you probably need like a zillion watt PSU, right? I think they are really focused on power efficiency as much as possible, but only in that they want to then crank up the power as much as possible to most efficiently get the most performance, even though they're cranking in tons of juice still. I kind of think this power efficiency versus performance, it's a little bit of a mirage, if you will, because more efficient just means, oh, we can get more performance out of the same amount of insane power. And that's what they're doing right now. So I don't expect this kind of arms race in terms of amount of power going into it to change anytime soon. Studio O2 builds, highly upvoted, said, do you think that people should steer clear from all white builds because of the extra expense and the lack of options for white graphics cards? Well, this all comes down to how important aesthetics are for you. And I think a lot of people, when they start thinking about building a new PC and what they want, they miss the very first step. The very first step is, what are you trying to achieve with this PC build? What are the things that are important to you? A lot of people will just assume that FPS is number one, but that's not necessarily true for everybody. You're playing like League of Legends and you only want like 60 FPS. Well, hitting that FPS, that kind of minimum acceptable FPS goal, relatively easy to do that, especially if you're playing easy to run titles, right? So then what else is important to you? Is saving money important to you? What is your budget on that? There's like, how important are aesthetics? And then what is your personal aesthetic? Some people are so focused on form factor, for instance. We see this all the time in Boost My Build. People who want an ITX build, a small form factor build, but they don't have the money for it. And they don't realize that, yeah, ITX motherboards cost a lot more money. The ITX cases cost a lot more money. And so it can actually end up costing you quite a bit more money. And that $1,000 that you thought should be able to buy you an ITX build may not work out so well for you. So when I think about themed and aesthetic kind of build, you just got to understand how important it is for you to get those aesthetics. But more than anything, ask yourself those questions before you begin kind of parting out your PC. What do you want to get out of it? Because if you skip those steps, you end up with these crazy mismatched builds that you just don't feel good about. And I want you to feel good about your PC build. All right, MMO Hopped asks, how long should you wait to upgrade your CPU, especially if you're upgrading your GPU every 2 to 3 generations? At what point is it no good? And we got a lot of upvotes on this one too. So let me take my best shot. I will direct you, of course, to our best CPU and GPU combo video that we released, I think about a month or so ago. So check that out down in the video description. And we go through this in great detail, including when to think about upgrading the CPU versus the GPU. But let me try and put this in a nutshell. Let's say you've got an i7 8700K or a Ryzen 2600 or something like that from a couple years back, and you're looking at bigger and bigger GPU upgrades, and you're wondering at what point does it just make sense to upgrade? Well, for AMD, they make it a lot more economical for you to upgrade. So you should probably, if you have an older AMD CPU, think about upgrading that, especially on the AM4 platform, sooner rather than later, because a Ryzen 5600 right now is $145. That's an insane price. I think it actually went up $5 today, but it's $150. And you can drop that into an AM4 motherboard from like 2017, and you can have like a virtually a brand new gaming PC. And then you can drop in some of the fastest GPUs that are available right now at the time of filming this, and they'll run great on it, as opposed to maybe your Ryzen 1700X or your Ryzen 2600 or something like that, which is going to get, fractions of that performance. On the Intel side, of course, then you have to take into account all the costs of upgrading, because your motherboard CPU memory costs right now are zero if you keep what you've got. It's a $0 cost. So you have to compare it against what it's going to cost to replace all that. So if you've got like an 8700K, maybe you hold on to that a little bit longer, because you can't just drop drop in an upgrade into that. That motherboard socket is it's gone now. You'd have to get a new motherboard. You may even have to get faster memory for it. All that has to go into thinking about it. And I would say if you're looking to put in a really fast GPU into a 3-generation-old CPU, then yes, at that point, almost without hesitation, I would go ahead and replace it. I would certainly consider it then. All right, we got Soul WD asked, they're building their first PC soon, Ryzen 5600X with RTX 3070, but what about the motherboard? Is that a component that you should be thinking about future-proofing, or should you just maybe upgrade it in the future when necessary? Well, here's the thing. Let's talk generally about motherboard and future-proofing. Like, it probably would have been a really smart thing had you known in 2017 that AM4 was going to last for a million years and that Ryzen was just going to get better and better and better and better and better, to buy like a really nice motherboard and upgrade that CPU every other upgrade. So 1700X maybe to the 3700X to the 50 whatever. That probably would have been smart. And when we get AM5, that might be the way to go. And it might be even an argument for paying slightly more, both for the motherboard, but for the overall platform. Because remember, we're going to be buying DDR5 for that. And DDR5 prices have come down quite a bit, but they're still way more expensive than DDR4. So it might make a lot of sense to go ahead and buy into that platform knowing that AM5 is going to last for a long time. And we know at this point that Ryzen should be really good. So that might make a lot of sense to future-proof that very first motherboard that you get. Outside of that, though, especially with AM4, there's nothing really to future-proof for it. It's not a technically dead socket because AMD said that they may still release some additional CPUs to it, but I'm thinking that these are going to be more at the budget tier. I would definitely not future-proof, just get the features that you want to get. Yeah, that's how I would think about it. Tech Wolf Cave, how am I feeling right now? Feeling pretty good. How do I do this kind of stuff? Is this my hobby of some sort? Yes, this was an absolute hobby of mine. I personally have been in the nonprofit and before that in the engineering field for about 20 odd years before I started doing this. And I have been building my own PCs since I was a kid. My dad, in addition to being in construction, he also did a lot of dabbling on the side. And then he was doing some IT for some medical groups, and I would help him build some of these PCs. So that's how I got into it. And I have both built my own PCs and then bought pre-builts at other times in my life, depending on kind of what was going on in my life, how busy I was. So got back into PC building sometime around 2016, 2017, and then just kind of got more and more and more and more into it and kind of went hardcore around 2019. And that's when I started the channel as well, able to leverage some of my experience in the operational world in terms of thinking about how to upgrade things and, what price to performance and all these other things that I have to do for my job, being able to bring that into, building a cool gaming PC or building a cool workstation PC and really getting into it. I have a great job now. I do this full time, and it's really only because of folks like you and the people who support this. So I really hope you're getting as much enjoyment out of this as I am making it. All right, we got Prism, and I couldn't think of a name, asking, how's the cat? He's fine. He's right here. Absolutely loves to be here all the time when he's not out in front of the bird feeder that we have in our window that attracts the birds. He's doing great right now, as you can see. Neil asks, I always feel like motherboard wiring and all the RGB connectors, GPU connections, everything are very complicated. Can we get videos working all this stuff out? Well, Neil, I got 2 videos that I'm planning, and let me know down in the comments if these are videos that you would find a lot of value in. One is I definitely want to do a how to build a PC, which is kind of a very slow, here's how you connect this, and then we do this next, and then we do this next, and here's some of the things to think about when you do this. I'm debating whether or not to wait for Ryzen 7000 in order to do it, or just maybe do a side-by-side. Here's Intel, here's AMD, here's how you do it right now. So let me know down in the video description if you want that. And then RGB, I know it's super complicated. I definitely want to do a video on that. It requires a lot more research on my end because I have to double check and triple check and quadruple check everything that I tell you that I put into a guide and make sure there's not some little exception or something there that I'm missing on some of this stuff, because it is very complicated. Let me know down in the video description if these are videos that you would really, really love to see. And obviously, the more demand for something there is, the more likely we are to do it. WVO Quine asks, for strictly gaming, at approximately what overall budget does it start to make sense to go to 32 gigabytes of RAM instead of 16 gigabytes? And first of all, great question, upvoted question, and I don't mind repeating this answer over and over and over again. I think there are folks out there who keep telling people to get more memory. But here's the answer. And I know some people don't like this answer. It never makes sense. It never makes sense. There is no, if I were to graph this on a graph, these lines would not intersect basically with making sense. Let's explain why that is. But I would point you to our best RAM for gaming 2022 video. We go over all this stuff in a lot more detail. If you haven't seen that, definitely recommend you check it out. Let me give a little bit more on this particular answer because I think this does confuse people. Listen, if you're just gaming, you'll close other applications in order to get the best gaming performance. And what you have to weigh is there's a cost of more RAM. Everything that you want to add to your system costs money. So if you're sitting at 16 gigabytes of memory and you want to go up to 32 gigabytes as you're designing your system here, it's going to cost you anywhere from $50 on up to $100, depending on the speed of the memory that you're getting, to jump up in terms of overall capacity. You have to weigh that extra $50 to $100 spent on RAM, what the utility of that RAM is versus spending another $100 on your graphics card. Imagine you're building a PC with like an RX 6600 XT. Right now they're going for about $330 in the US. That $100 could upgrade you to a 6700 XT with 16 gigabytes of memory instead of 32. Well, which one of those would you rather have? I think most people who are strictly gaming, that's the question, would rather have the 6700 XT, and you can make the same comparison for like the 3070 and the 38, on and so forth. Now, if you run into a situation where it only costs you 10 or 15 bucks to increase your RAM, and you probably can't use that money anywhere else, yeah, I would increase the RAM. That would make some sense. I'm not slamming anyone who gets 32 gigs of memory. A lot of my PCs, I get 32 gigs of memory, but I make sure to check all the other boxes that I want to get, and I think through the kind of price to performance of upgrading this component versus that component. So those are the things that you should be thinking about. But just from a strictly gaming point, it never makes sense. Now, if you tell me you're going to do video editing with large projects, things that are not just gaming, if you're going to add those workloads in, I'm going to watch 1,000 videos while I'm doing it, or you have 10,000 tabs open. Well, now you're not strictly gaming anymore. So now, yes, you should probably take that into consideration in your PC build. And again, weigh the utility of the cost of the extra memory versus the value you get out of it versus spending that money somewhere else, a better CPU, a better GPU, more cooling, cooler looking case, RGB, more storage, whatever it is you would, so desire. So that's how I would answer that question. I know some people are never going to like that answer. If you got value out of this video, give it a like. It makes a huge difference, especially to this guy right here. And of course, subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. If you're looking for even more cool content like Boost My Build, where we take your PC part picker list, we tear them up, we put them back together, and massively increase your performance, check out this video right here. It's a really great time. He'll like you even more, and we'll catch you on the next one.